Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode is admittedly a little awkward. So, yeah, the episode kind of works, is kind of built around what was going on from last episode, which is that Mystery Inc. kind of isn't really working all that well together anymore. And there's a very obvious reason for that, namely that Velma and Shaggy kind of broke up and kind of caused them problems, but they do kind of get together to solve a case, albeit not as efficiently as they normally would, but yeah, the episode actually opens up with a charity auction run by Nan Blake and her friend Sheila, who is introduced in this episode, and they're kind of working to run a charity auction to see how much money they can raise. But in any case, yeah, this episode it opens up with them doing a charity auction. The auctioneer is just kind of listing off a bunch of things. One guy named Gary actually winds up winning tickets to a what is it? He wins ticket. I think he wins tickets to like a ballet thing, and then he's immediately kind of carried off by the girl who accompanied the tickets, and that's kind of an interesting thing. But then they get to one of the big ticket items with Nan just remarking about how well the charity auction seems to be going. Although Sheila later admits that they've only raised about $35. Although Nan points out that $35 is more than enough to do some good, and she's not wrong. $35. I mean, it's not much, but $5 can go a long way to helping somebody, even if it's not a whole lot. It can't. Just any small donation can help. But that's really all you need to know about that. A charity, yes, having a lot of money that you can actually donate to is very helpful and could help speed run the process, but you don't need to. Just whatever you can donate to your local charity is fine. That's all you need. But in any case, they then get to the auctioneer's next item, which is a scary painting with a castle and picture of a moon on it. And yeah, he then starts trying to auction it off for $5, but nobody bites. And very obviously nobody actually wants the painting, and he starts getting desperate and starts lowering the price to ludicrously low numbers. I'm hoping that somebody will actually try and take it and try to run an auction on it, but everybody just kind of stares at him awkwardly and doesn't really want the painting. But in any case, it's at this moment where a vampire actually winds up showing up and starts rampaging through the main atrium where they are, and of course everybody immediately panics and tries to get the exits, only to discover that they're locked. So the auctioneer tries to actually turn on the lights, but in the time it takes for him to turn on the light, the auctioneer has since stolen the vampire has since stolen the painting and disappeared, and with Nan being openly distraught about it. Meanwhile, Mystery Inc. is chilling in Daphne's pool, and Daphne and Fred are having a very awkward one-sided conversation where Fred is trying to explain how he would trap a monster for her, and she couldn't care less. Meanwhile, Shaggy and Scooby are just kind of hanging out in the pool and having a fun time when Velma walks out and asks Shaggy if he likes her new bikini, and she's wearing her usual sweater and this miniskirt, so he has no idea what she's actually talking about. But she merely remarks that she is indeed wearing one, but she doesn't want to get burned, and with that, just kind of sits down and just kind of just gives him a death glare before picking up a newspaper and starting reading it. And interestingly enough, the newspaper is just gibberish, and you can't actually read any of it. But yeah. Meanwhile, Fred decides to quote unquote pay her a compliment. Not really. The compliment he gives her is that her pasty skin could blind any monster they try to catch, which Daphne only points out that isn't a very nice thing to say. But in any case, as they're just kind of working all that out, Nan Blake then proceeds to barge into the pool area and starts complaining about how a vampire ruined her auction. With Fred pointing out that that's actually a perfect opportunity for them to actually go out and solve some mysteries. And then proceeds to, as he puts it, have Velma put her pasty skin on stun, which only further annoys her and Velma and Daphne. But in any case, they then proceed to get ready to go into the mystery machine, and Fred is very urgent about the fact that they need to get ready because to go because time's a wasting. But the girl, none of them actually want to work together. I should point out. Obviously, Daphne is siding with Velma about the fact that she got her heart broken, and Velma kind of just doesn't want to work with Shaggy right now. So for that reason, they decide to split up, with Fred remarking that it's actually a bit too early, and also makes a bit of a fourth wall break regarding the franchise about how yeah, he makes a bit of a meta joke about how they usually only split up when they go into a spooky cave or an amusement park, and it's kind of funny. It's kind of a really funny little yeah, that happens a lot in this franchise. Yeah, we do split up a lot, but in case after realizing that they do need to actually split up, since obviously they're not going to be working together very well, Scooby and Shaggy decide that maybe splitting up is a good idea and get into the mystery machine with Fred, and the three of them drive off while Daphne actually escorts Velma back inside for some mani-pedis while they discuss some things. So at which point the trio of guys are just kind of driving in the mystery machine, and Shaggy remarks that it feels a little bit weird, and Fred, assuming he's talking about the fact that the group is already splitting up, points out that it is a little bit weird to actually be working without the girls, but then Shaggy actually clarifies, pointing out that he doesn't normally get to sit up front. As he points out, he never actually gets to ride shotgun, so the fact that he is in this episode is just kind of very, it makes him very happy, and he's just happy to be sitting in the front seat, and that's just kind of the most pure thing ever. It's just, yeah, he normally sits in the back, so the fact that he's sitting in the front is actually kind of interesting, but in case Fred then realizes that if they're going to catch a vampire, they're going to need to figure out where they need to go. And sure enough, in the process, he actually just Fred, and obviously Shaggy and Scooby recommend several restaurants that they could go and stake out, but Fred kind of just ignores their suggestions and decides to go with whatever's with what his idea as well, and decides to that logically it's a vampire, so they should probably check out a cemetery and see if it would be hanging out there. And they then proceed to go do that off screen. We don't actually get to see that, but meanwhile, Daphne decides to give Velma a bit of a pep talk, quote unquote, and her pep talk is kind of depressing. Admittedly, in the episode itself, Velma actually acknowledges that the pep talk is actually depressing. But basically, how Daphne decides to give Velma a pep talk is about how guys will always pick stupid things. And that if you give them a choice between a smart thing and a stupid thing, they're always going to do it. And that's why her advice is don't give them a choice, which yeah, pretty depressing. And also, I feel a little bit offended as a guy myself, but yeah, I don't normally do stupid things, but sometimes I do, but not always. But in any case, as they're having that little conversation, Nan suddenly whips on her cloak and actually proceeds to get ready to go out and leave. But with Velma noting that it's a little bit odd and wondering where she's going, and Daphne decides to actually concur with Velma and asks her mom hollers after her mom to know where she's going, and her mom Nan just kind of gives a very bogus little idea of, I'm going out to go get some pate and I'll be back later, which immediately strikes Daphne as off, since as she points out, apparently pate makes Nan Blake has an allergic reaction to pate, and points out that she wouldn't be eating it because it gives her the runs. So they decide to actually go off and investigate, but they also kind of tiptoe their way out of the room, since obviously they just got their nails done and can't actually move very efficiently. But in any case, in the next actual suggestion that they have, Scooby and Shaggy are just kind of waiting in the mystery machine while Fred goes to check out the local blood drive, and what we find out is that he accidentally spilled some blood on himself. He accidentally knocked a bag of blood all over himself and got it all over himself, and he doesn't. And what we find out is that he doesn't fully understand that he's covered in blood, but yeah, he winds up coming back from the blood drive all covered in blood, and points out that he couldn't find any leads about the vampire there. And also the people there apparently kicked him out for obviously knocking over some of their blood bags. But But in any case, he points out that he's actually running out of ideas where he can actually go and investigate. At which point, Shaggy and Scooby decide to actually suggest to go back to Fruit Myers and go investigate there. And obviously, Fred doesn't fully believe that that's actually a good idea for them to be doing, but suggests that it's better than nothing, since, as he points out, everybody loves Fruit Myers. And with that, they actually go off to go and investigate. Meanwhile, Daphne and Velma have been actually tailing Nan Blake, but she immediately disappears as they're trying to find her, and obviously, Daphne is quick to point out that it's because Nan power walks. She power walks every morning, and that's why she's so fast. And Velma merely points out that she must have calves the size of yams, since obviously she's very fast, and there's no way they're actually going to keep up with her. But in case, after trying to figure out where exactly they could go to actually go and investigate, decides to actually note that the Crystal Cove Botanical Garden has its lights on, which they point out is a little bit strange, especially as Daphne puts it. Nan doesn't like nature very much and only likes things that she can pay for. So with that, they then proceed to go out and go investigate and go investigate. Meanwhile, Shaggy is kind of wondering. While the rest of the guys are actually investigate is actually kind of pull up on a cliff to eat their Fruit Myers, and Shaggy merely points out that he has no idea what to do, pointing out that in regards to Velma, because obviously he points out that obviously he wanted to try and make their breakup as clean as possible, but that didn't really happen, and now she hates him for it, and for obvious reasons. He picked a dog over her. Obviously, anybody would be a little bit salty about that, but in case Fred then merely points out that he just needs to create what he calls a Velma Trap. With him pointing out that with Shaggy actually pointing out the dubiousness of how that would actually work, but he merely points out that it'll probably be fine. At which point they proceed and points out that they do need to as long as if he sets a trap and doesn't let her go, she'll probably fall for him that way, and that's But in any case, as Fred is trying and failing to give Shaggy some romantic advice, they also notice that the light to the botanical garden is on and decide to actually go and investigate, pointing out that it shouldn't be on that late after hours. So with that, they then proceed to arrive at the mystery machine, and Fred decides that now is a perfect opportunity to actually set up a trap and get ready to catch themselves a vampire. And in the process, he actually opens up the bed of the mystery machine, and Shaggy are just notably annoyed and a little confused about the fact that Fred just has all this stuff, and Shaggy even decides to ask Fred where he got it, and Fred merely points out that he actually gets it from a special store, and that because he's a frequent trapper, as he puts it, he actually gets a special discount, so he's able to buy a lot more stuff than he otherwise normally would be, and it's kind of funny in that regard, but. In any case, they immediately get into the botanical garden and proceed to start setting up a trap to actually catch the vampire. Meanwhile, Velma and Daphne are actually investigating it on their own independently. And with Daphne merely remarking that it smells like poop. It smells like that thing that you put on plants to help them grow better. And let's not be perfectly honest with it. And Velma is perfectly honest with it. It's poop. It literally manure. Manure is poop. I've explained this in a recent stream, I think. But yeah, you put manure on your plants and they grow better. That's it. But in any case, yeah, these two little plot threads actually wind up converging on one another. Where Fred, Scooby, and Shaggy, having set a trap for a vampire using a T-bone steak, they accidentally wind up trapping Velma and Daphne. So yeah, obviously they don't know it's Velma and Daphne. Velma and Daphne wind up walking into the trap, and they wind up getting trapped by the guys, who then go to investigate, only to realize too late, hey, we accidentally trapped our teammates. And sure enough, Shaggy immediately lets them down by actually untying the anchor that's holding the whole trap down. But the two guys obviously come to the rescue of the girls and pull them to their feet and ask them if they're all right, and they admit that they're fine. But then the vampire actually shows up and starts chasing after them and tries to attack them. And of course the group then proceeds to split up and try and run away from the vampire. Fred and Daphne actually wind up running through some trees, and Daphne immediately tells Fred to not let go, which she inevitably does by accident. And he even points out that he didn't even realize that he had let go of her. But meanwhile Scooby and Shaggy try to go through a bed of thorns, because Scooby points out, as Shaggy points out, it might actually be a shortcut to the exit. But when he discovers that it's actually a bed of thorns, Scooby just remarks, why do they have to go vampire hunting? And at which point vampire actually winds up walking them into the bed of flowers, and eventually the gardener actually shows up and sees all the chaos that's unfolding inside of his botanical garden, and tries to chase the vampire off, only for the vampire to actually wind up attacking him and leaving. And at which point the rest of the gang kind of recuperate. Velma is once again very snarky with Shaggy, asking him if he's all right, and Shaggy points out that he's okay, but then realizes that she doesn't actually care, and decides to actually drop the subject entirely. While Fred kind of just apologizes to Daphne for accidentally letting go of her hand. At which point they discover that the vampire has actually stolen yet another item. According to the gardener, his star orchid is now missing and has since been stolen, which they point out is very strange. It is at this point where they actually wind up converging in the mystery machine and proceeding to go and figure out what the seemingly random list of ingredients actually is. And Velma decides that the best place to actually look is probably her mom's museum, pointing out that her mom actually has a lot of information about a bunch of mythological creatures. Case in point, she gave them information on the gnome the last time they asked for her for advice. And they proceed to go to the Broken Spine, which is the bookstore inside the Crystal Cove Museum. They point, and sure enough, she's in the middle of ordering some petrified monkeys from Skull Island, which is a kind of a callback to a previous episode, to a previous thing that they did from the live action continuity of this. But in any case, Velma then asks her mom what she knows about vampires once they get there, and Mrs. Dinkley actually remarks that they actually came to the right place, and proceeds to bring her to a giant shelf full of lists of vampires, and points out that the Broken Spine actually has the biggest collection of vampire stories in the world, according to herself, and that there should be more than enough information to actually go by. And sure enough, they start actually tearing into the books to try and figure out what exactly it is the vampire's after. But it's at this point where they actually find out that Daphne actually winds up seeing a shadow out of the corner of her eye, and proceeds to go and investigate, and proceeds to follow it. But she doesn't actually know where the shadow actually is, and as she follows it, and the shadowy figure actually winds up pushing a book off of the shelf, which is a physics book, and she starts putting it in, and Daphne tries to put it back several times, not fully understanding that the person on the other end of the bookshelf, who is heavily implied to be Ed Machine, based on his voice, and then we do later see him, but Ed Machine then really points out that he's kind of exasperated with her, and points out that it has the information she seeks before just piecing out and leaving, and without Daphne ever seeing him. At which point she then proceeds to open the book and finds an old beauty magazine, and realizes that this is what the vampire is after the whole time, and proceeds to show it to the rest of the gang, who have since exhausted all of the other books that they've been trying to read, and points out that it was that the issue she found in the magazine is a particularly interesting issue that was made for Halloween, to celebrate the Halloween season, and as we find out, the magazine itself has a possibly phony recipe for a youth potion, which is supposed to make people, which is supposed to kind of halt the aging process or something like that. But according to the magazine itself, it may not work. And at which point Velma accurately points out that it's likely that whoever's wearing the disguise of the vampire likely doesn't know that the potion doesn't actually work, and is currently in the process of just kind of just not really understanding that the potion likely won't bring them eternal youth, but Daphne points out that someone clearly hasn't gotten the message, and eventually discovers that they actually do have a bit of a lead now, which is that now that they have the list of ingredients that the vampire's after, Fred points out they can actually go out and go investigate each of the individual ingredients and stop the vampire in her tracks. With Daphne pointing out that there actually is there's actually a particular brand of wine listed on one of the potion ingredients, and points out that there's only one place in the entire town that's pretentious enough to have it on its wine list. Which is revealed to be like the clam shack of Dr. Calamari or something along those lines. But they point out but Daphne merely points out that Dr. Calamari's is a very prestigious restaurant that likely won't be able to actually won't let them in unless they follow the dress code, so they're going to need to go get changed, and they proceed to go back to the house, only to discover as they're going in that Nan and Sheriff Stone were having a bit of a conversation, and apparently, according to Sheriff Stone, he also has suspected that Nan is indeed the vampire, and just decided to ask her a few questions before leaving. And with Nan pointing out that she was very annoyed at the fact that Sheriff Stone actually accused her of being the vampire, and points out that that's just a good thing that Sheila was there. At which point, Sheila shows up and kind of slides in the frame like the vampire, and which winds up unnerving them a little bit, and at which point Sheila then tells Nan not to worry her pretty little face, and that it's all going to be fine. At which point they then proceed to leave and go deeper into the house. With Daphne now convinced that her mother is actually innocent, they decide to actually sneak into Dr. Calamari's to actually find out find the wine that the vampire is actually after. And with that, they then proceed to get into some disguises by disguising themselves as French tourists, which is a really, really funny little sequence. Where the guy kind of looks at them a little bit where the maitre d' kind of just looks at them a little bit funny, pointing out that obviously the way they're dressed is kind of not really inappropriate. And he even points that out. But he does also ask them if they have a reservation, which they obviously do not. But they then proceed to actually kind of put out a bit of a ploy where they decide to actually pretend they need to use the bathroom so they can sneak into the wine cellar that way. Although Fred doesn't play along at first. He kind of doesn't understand what they're doing, but once Daphne elbows him in the ribs, he quickly realizes what they're actually doing, and decides to actually play along. At which point the maitre d' decides that he can't really turn down people who need to pee, and decides to just let them in. And also there's in the very funny sequence, they actually use the French word for yes to describe the fact that they have to go to the bathroom, and it's hilarious. But in any case, they then proceed to find the bathrooms which conveniently is right next to where the wine cellar is. And it's at this point where Velma decides that they can now abandon their disguises and go into the wine cellar. But Shaggy points out that they should probably wait for him, since as he points out, they actually have to pee. He actually does have to pee, but nobody listens to him and just drags him deeper into the wine cellar. At which point they discard their disguises, find the wine that the vampire is after, and but Velma points out that there's also something very strange about it, about why a vampire would need need a youth potion in the first place. But they don't really have much time to actually contemplate that, because the vampire immediately shows up and starts jumping around the room and trying to attack them and get the wine away from them. And Fred eventually comes up with a later admittedly stupid idea, where he decides that the safest way to get away from the vampire is to actually hide inside a giant cage. And sure enough, the rest of the gang eventually follows him inside, and the vampire just locks him in. And then proceeds to gloat about how stupid they are, and then proceeds to pick up the wine and leave, pointing out that now it only needs the one ingredient, and then Eternal Youth will be hers. And with that, the vampire just kind of leaves and pieces out. And then the episode immediately doesn't really explain how they get out of the cage. All it points out is that Daphne is obviously annoyed at Fred for getting them locked in a cage, and also proceeds to point out that they proceed to just kind of leave the cage. They doesn't explain how they actually got out. The maitre d' presumably found them, kicked them out. I have no idea. The episode doesn't explain it. I'm just kind of making stuff up. But in case once they're back in the mystery machine, Shaggy merely points out that he feels like they're very off their game. and points out that it feels like that they're not working as well as they should be. But it's at this point where Fred realizes that they only have one last real ingredient to actually go and investigate, and the ingredient itself is revealed to be a rare gemstone called the Devil's Eye, which is this supposedly cursed ruby that kind of looks like an eyeball, but they point out that the only place where they can actually find it is the Crystal Cove Museum of Oddities, and decide to actually go there and set up a trap waiting for the vampire. And once again, Velma does point out how she's a little bit confused about it, pointing out that she, once again, if vampires are immortal, why does the vampire need a love potion, need an immortality potion? That is something that she can't quite get her head around. But in case, as they're actually getting into hiding positions and having set up the trap, Daphne actually winds up seeing her mom once again at the scene of the crime, because that's been a recurring thing through this episode, where she's just in places where she's not normally found. And eventually, after finally seeing her at the museum this one final time, having seen her in all the other previous locations where her family most likely has the vampire is most likely struck, Daphne concludes that her mother is indeed the vampire and proceeds to actually chase after her to go and find her. But with Fred merely pointing out that she needs to stay in position when they can spring the trap. And sure enough, in the time that Daphne was actually gone, the vampire showed up, completely destroys their trap, and proceeds to actually take out most of Mystery Inc. in the process, or at least almost takes them all out. And with that, then proceeds to gloat her final victory, pointing out that now that she has the Devil's Eye, that she can finally make the love potion, to make the immortality potion. But Velma merely points out that they actually planned for her to show up and steal the gem, revealing that she actually replaced the gem on the pedestal with a fake one somehow, even though I'm pretty sure there's like infrared stuff and all that prevents museum artifacts from being stolen. I'm not going to really logic that one out a little bit. It is a little bit clever on Velma's part, but I don't think the security systems inside the actual museum itself would allow her to do that. But in any case, Fred then proceeds to deploy the secondary trap, and proceeds to get ready to drop the net on her. But then it doesn't work, and the rope that he's holding onto actually kind of just unravels. Which with the vampire just kind of momentarily gloating, pointing out that trap didn't seem to work, and even smiles a little bit. At which point Scooby figures out from the balcony above what exactly is going wrong and why the trap didn't work. And after snapping some of the wires with his teeth, the vampire winds up getting trapped inside the net. And the vampire is understandably very upset, pointing out that she feels that obviously she needs to be let go so she can finish her potion. But it's at this point where Daphne finally returns with the rest of the group, and proceeds to tell her mom that her vampiring has come to an end, and that she as much as she regrets having to do it, she's going to have to stake her. Which is really funny. But then the vampire then kind of obviously protests because she doesn't want to be staked to the heart, and reveals herself to actually be Sheila, Nan's assistant and friend that has been in this episode throughout. But yeah, and then we eventually do find out why Sheila's motivation is the way it is. As it turns out, Sheila and Nan are the same age, and yet Sheila is very beautiful, whereas Sheila is not very beautiful, whereas Nan's looks are kind of eternal-ish. And basically, she just did it out of jealousy. She became jealous of Nan having beautiful, drop-dead looks while her looks are starting to go. Which Mr. Ing then proceeds to try and deny, pointing out that she's still beautiful-ish. But then she points out that she did indeed find the formula for the immortality potion, and realizing it was better than nothing, decides to actually steal all of the artifacts that she needed to actually make herself a new portrait, make herself look beautiful forever. And then declares that she would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those mailing kids. But she's actually interrupted by Nan, who cuts her off mid monologue and actually just shows up. And Daphne actually winds up embracing her mother, relieved that she's not actually the vampire, which Nan points out she's a little bit confused by, but decides it's fine. Then Daphne points out that if she's not the vampire, what has she actually been doing? And Daphne actually, what we find out is that Nan has apparently been applying for a degree to become a notary. which they point out, which the rest of Mystery Inc. actually congratulate her on, pointing out that that's a big accomplishment. But then Nan completely completely derails that sentiment by pointing out that obviously it's not so much how you look on the outside, but what it is on the inside, and obviously points out that as long as you're smart as well as beautiful, that's all that really matters. But then she also breaks off that sentiment entirely by pointing out that she doesn't actually know what a notary is, and her final exam is tomorrow, and with that she just kind of leaves. So yeah, which obviously very much confuses the rest of Mystery Inc. But in case with that, Sheila is then arrested by Sheriff Stone and hauled off to the police station, and this episode just kind of ends on a bit of an awkward note with Mystery Inc. just kind of not so gracefully breaking up. So, yeah, it starts off with Daphne just kind of leaving now that the mystery has been solved and her mother's name has been cleared. And Fred, not really knowing how to respond, just kind of leaves awkwardly, telling them that he'll trap them later. And then Daphne just kind of, and then Velma just kind of ends it off by being openly hostile to Shaggy one final time, pointing out by calling him his actual name of Norval. But she then proceeds to actually leave Shaggy and Scooby alone by themselves, and with Shaggy merely remarking that it's likely that seems to be just them. And but Scooby merely points out that it'll probably be fine and it'll work out, and he'll see. And with that, the two of them then proceed to go home. All while Ed Machine sees the entire breakup from the cliffside where he apparently is, and sees the gang break up over the mystery, and he's visibly annoyed by the fact that they broke up. Since obviously now that they've broken up, his boss, Mr. E, can't do the thing that he's been trying to do in the background of this whole time. He's been trying to get them to help him solve the mystery of the original Mystery Incorporated, but obviously they can't do that anymore if they're broken up. So yeah, this episode is interesting for a number of reasons, namely that Mystery Inc. seems to have broken up and are now no longer working together, which is interesting. I get the feeling that's going to be resolved considering there's another season and a half of this, but but it is interesting that at the time of this episode, they are officially broken up and are no longer solving mysteries together. And I'm interested to see how that's actually going to affect the plot going forward. How is I mean, obviously they are going to address the fact that Mystery Inc. is no longer solving mysteries and are going to need to come back together to help continue solving the mystery of their predecessors. But yeah, what's interesting, what is interesting here is that this episode just kind of shows them kind of being dysfunctional and not really working well together. So obviously this very much falls apart. Their whole mystery thing very much falls apart, and it's more or less a couple of different factors, namely that Fred is just being openly callous and unfeeling and kind of tone deaf in this episode. He's just kind of saying a bunch of things that are kind of that you probably shouldn't be saying around other people. I should admit that he's admittedly been very dumb in this series, but this episode just kind of takes that to a whole different level, and obviously there's also the fact that his obsession with traps just kind of pushes Daphne away finally, but also there's the fact that Scooby, Shaggy, and Velma kind of had a love triangle thing that broke up sort of recently. And obviously that kind of put it on a whole strain on Mystery Inc. and their ability to actually solve mysteries. And obviously, as this episode establishes, if the guys working together and the girls working together independently from each other doesn't really work. As we find out, as we do see in this episode, Mystery Inc. Obviously Shaggy and Scooby are very much obsessed with food and don't really give and don't really bounce off of Fred as well as the girls do. Since obviously they don't really contribute much in the way of actually mystery solving. I mean, they do contribute to the team, but not in that way. That was not what their role in the team is. They're kind of the glue that keeps the team together. So yeah, they're not really really good at mystery solving. They have solved mysteries, but they're not really the main contributors of that. And obviously the girls without the guys to kind of help guide them a little bit, or at the very least to help them. Or at the very least with Fred to provide some sort of leadership role, and the guys to kind of just mellow them, to kind of just balance them out. They kind of don't really do all that well together. Since obviously the entire thing is that they're like the damsels in distress and stuff like that, and that's was kind of sexist back when it was a thing, and less so now. But obviously yes, that Velma's the smart one, but at the end of the day, they're still girls. They're I'm trying to speak about this as neutrally as possible, but TLDR, they don't really work together since obviously Daphne is very much Obviously, Daphne and Velma don't really know how to take charge and actually conduct a mystery on their own. And the thing is and I think this is just what, in general, I mean, the long and short of what I'm trying to say is that every member of Mystery Inc. has a certain role that they fill within the team, and this episode does a very good job of showcasing what happens when those pieces aren't all in place. So yeah, it very much showcases that they just kind of fall apart and can't really work like the well-oiled machine they normally do. They all fulfill a role in the actual team of Mystery Inc. And when they can't do that, their team falls apart. So that's what the episode is about. But in any case, yeah, that's my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks, and I'm always saying thanks. So just, yeah, be sure to go check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to both, check out my Twitch, link is down in the description. I stream every Sunday at 2:30 Eastern, so if you guys want to see that, be sure to go check that out and follow me. And the other way you can do that is by checking out my videos linked in the end screen, the top videos in the most recent one, whereas the bottom video is based on what you've already seen. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, regardless of whether or not you do any of those things, thank you guys so much for watching. As next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!